Okay, welcome to Chapter 2. So Chapter 2 is on the need for security, page 27. You might be thinking, isn't that kind of self-evident? So here are the learning objectives. Discuss the need. That sounds kind of silly. What the fact that this is a shared responsibility, right? List and describe the threats, and then the common issues that come up. So the opening case, talks about, being reactive or proactive. It's pretty good. You probably need to stop and read the thing. The need for a security program, not just devices, a whole thing. And then, it does require some resources. Yeah, you do have to spend money to make these things work. So on page 28, they're talking about, the mission is to assure assets are protected. Okay, I'll go along with that. And they basically talk about there's 4 functions involved in this. Whoop, I don't have that. Okay, so the 4 functions are the ability to function, right? Data and information, safe operations, and technology assets. Those are basically the little bullet lists on page 28. So they first start talking about the business needs first. On page 29. So basically, when security needs and business needs collide, the business is going to win out. In other words, we're not doing this in a vacuum. We're not protecting things just because we can. We're protecting things and protecting them in a way that is conducive to the business. It's all about the business. Okay. Just to give you a hint on how people can get kind of crazy. Let me tell you a crazy story. So, we had somebody come up and say, hey, the new version of Office just came out. When are we going to upgrade? And they said, well, there's something wrong with the Office that you have. And they go, well, no, but it's new. It's like, no, but the Word and PowerPoint, is there something wrong with it? Well, no, but there's new. And it's like, because it's new is not an excuse, right? Just because it's new, there has to be a valid business reason for me to spend money to upgrade your version of Microsoft Office. It's not automatic. It costs money. Okay, I don't spend money without having a valid reason. Well, it's the same thing with security. Hey, we got this really cool, cyber lock we can put on the door. Why? Oh, because it's new. Well, I'm sorry. That's not good enough. So protecting functionality, they talk about implementing security has more to do with management than technology. Yeah, big time. Technology can help, but geez, that's not as far as it goes. The solution to a technical problem might not be more technology. Okay? I mean, I told you the story about I was unsuccessful in beating the heads over somebody, and I ended up with a technical solution to a management problem. Okay, so it's kind of the exact opposite of what we're talking about here. Is I had to remove a column to make it so they could not print a report that had Social Security numbers in. So I applied technology to solve a non-technology problem, but unfortunately, that's not always the case. Okay. So protecting data is the second bullet there. So we're talking about the data at rest while it's being used and while it's being transmitted. So at rest, processing, and then transmission. So for example, the HIPAA rules, if you ever got into any, the Health Insurance Portability and Protection Act, talks about medical data, that your medical data. So for you, let's say you have an imaging machine, like an MRI or an X-ray machine. While it's producing that X-ray, it has to have encryption at the device. It has to be encrypted over the wire, and it has to be encrypted at the server. Okay, in all 3 places, when it's being used, when it's being transmitted, and when it's being stored. Okay, all 3 places. So database security is often where this gets talked about, because, you have database, client and a database over the wire, and then you have the database itself, right? So database security is a completely separate discipline that we're probably not going to delve too deep in. This is kind of a shallow course. So physical controls, that makes sense. You got to have locks on the doors, that kind of stuff. Technical controls, that kinds of things. So those are all about protecting the data. I mean, yes, we could be talking about encryption and all the rest of that stuff, but not in this chapter. Okay? Yikes. I did not mean to do that. Okay. So enabling safe operations. So we're all talking about the applications that we use, making sure that the stuff that we're using is safe to use, that we don't have, we don't let, for example, normal users install software on their corporate machines because we have no assurances what they're installing is safe, right? Okay. So corporate security policies are found in this section of, the 4 bullets. This is where they say, you're not going to have administrator rights on the machine. You can't do this and you can't do this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the operating system and whatever line of business software you have, payroll, all the rest of that stuff, email. Email is a tough one. You're going to have, like spam filters and attachment scannings. So all this stuff is designed to keep you safe, right? So policies keep you safe. Technical controls keep you safe. Technical control being, spam filtering and attachment filtering, things of that nature. And then safeguarding assets. So we're really talking about security infrastructure kind of thing. Think about like a firewall. A firewall would make sure that no one's, bringing something in or somebody's not, supposed to be in is stayed out, that kind of stuff. This is talked about intrusion detection systems, kind of sort of like a burglar alarm. Again, we're going to have an entire chapter on this later. The using of keys, we're in chapter 10, we're going to be talking about the public key encryption kind of a thing. And then, using, virtual private networks to be able to get in. So we're all talking about the same thing. We're talking about safeguarding assets rather. Okay. So on page 30, they talk about the threats and attacks. They talk about, the art of war. And so the art of war, ancient, Chinese text, talks about knowing yourself and knowing your enemy both. You really need to know, what your assets are and what your vulnerabilities are. Let me just tell you, let's say, for example, that you have a casual of idea where all the PCs are, and you had no idea that in a broom closet somewhere, there was a PC set up as a print server, and you didn't even know that it existed. Well, let me tell you, you cannot protect PCs that you don't even know exist. Okay, so you need to know yourself, and you need to be able to know your enemy both. So a threat is always present. Okay, it's sort of like that vulnerability thing. A threat meaning somebody could break in the door, and steal stuff, right? And then an attack is only when it's actually happening. So I have a jewelry store, and the threat is somebody could take a sledgehammer and, break the glass and climb through the front window. It might set off the alarm, but, it's still a threat. And the attack is that they have done that, and the alarm is going off, and the police are on their way. Okay. So obviously a threat doesn't cause a loss, right? No one's stealing anything. But an attack, well, yeah, there could be a loss. Okay. So they talk about users on the internet. This is basically trying to impress you on the number of the worldwide use of the internet. This is kind of old, but that's okay. So basically, we're talking about the number of people who are actually internet users. So right now, in the entire world, 62% of the people are on the internet or can get on the internet. That's an awful lot. So 62% means there's going to be an awful lot of good guys, and there's also going to be an awful lot of bad guys on there. So if there's 7.8 billion people on the planet, and 4.8 billion are actually on the internet. Now, wait a minute now. This is kind of confusing. Are we talking people here? Or are we talking devices? For example, one person might have an iPad, an iPhone, a Mac, maybe another computer. So that's 5 internet IP addresses for one person. So do I count that as, 4 devices, or to count that as one person? It's a little complicated, isn't it? Okay, so threats. They talk about 67% of organizations suffer some sort of malware infection. Okay, so here's a table. And, aha! That's what I wanted at the very beginning and missed. Okay. Let me get past all this. Okay, here we go. Here's the threats. So, here's what people think. The inability or unwillingness to follow policy. Remember we talked about apathy and ignorance? Yeah, that is number one. Yeah. Absolutely number one problem, the threat that people have. Disclosure to the training, same thing. It's people. Unauthorized escalation of privileges, okay. Unauthorized information and data sniffing, okay. Implying from the outside, I would think. Theft of on-site, that's insider. Theft of mobile, I mean I left it in the back of a cab. Intentional damage, yeah, okay, probably insiders. Theft or misuse, probably insiders. Website defacement, probably outsiders. Blackmail and, ransomware, that kind of stuff. So, yes, these are threats that are coming in. So, most of them are from internal sources, not external. And the most common threat is ignorance and apathy. I know you told me not to put that file out there in the public area, but, I don't care. Yeah, well, somebody cares. So let's talk about external sources. All right. So data collection, escalation, defacement, intentional damage, theft, blackmail, disclosure. So blackmail gets a little higher. Misuse of leased, purchased, and developed software. So again, external sources pretty much will mirror, the internal sources, but that's okay. External sources. So are people really, really, really afraid of viruses? Yeah, but is it really their number one concern? Is that what keeps them up at night? Probably not. It's those dang internal guys. So the next one talks about perceived threats. Now this is a little complicated, as you can probably imagine. Because a perceived threat doesn't necessarily mean it's a real threat. So, electronic phishing and spoofing attacks, most people think that's a malware attack. So a lot of people think that, phishing attacks and malware attacks are number one. Are they really? Maybe, maybe not. But again, perceived threats. This is mostly due to Hollywood. When Hollywood goes in there and talks about how easy it is to break into somebody's phone, clone the phone as they're walking by, that kind of stuff. Hollywood tends to dramatize, breaking into some system. And the problem is that the people that we elect for, public office aren't technical, and they watch the same movies that you watch. And they watch the same TV, and they have a perception that perhaps is not real. And so they start making laws to protect things that the security professionals are going, why are you bothering with that? I mean, that's a little weird. Okay, there is a classification system on page 33, a common attack pattern and numerization and classification, CAPAC. So I'm going to go to this website in just a minute that basically explains how all this stuff works. So stay tuned for part 2.